The MLS offseason is in full swing, meaning all the players are out playing golf. But Shep, when's our tea time?
Hey, Greg, this is ET. We don't have an off season.
Ugh, we got to start playing again. Greetings, everybody, and welcome to MLSnet.com's Extra Time. I'm your host, Greg Lawless, alongside Shep Messing, as always. And this week, we're going to take a look back at the first 2 weeks of the offseason, and then look at some of the developments that have already taken place around the league. So, Shep, let's start off right away with the two biggest stories that have happened in the offseason so far. San Jose has started to build a team, the expansion draft. They picked up 10 players, and then Clint Mathis was traded to LA. So, let's start with San Jose. What are your thoughts on what they picked up?
Well, Greg, I'll tell you what, you talk about the job that John Doyle did with Frankie Yallop. I think spectacular. I think those guys did their homework. Obviously, they both know the league, know the talent, have salary cap in mind. So I think they started from the back. You know, Clarence Goodson and Cochran, two wonderful defenders. Joe Vide, a holding defensive midfielder. I think they did a great job.
Yeah, I like Joe Vide a lot. I actually think that was a huge pickup because I think he's a player that can really help that team in the midfield, especially one of those hard-nosed players right up the spine. You know, there were lots of questions when you go into something like this. Are you picking players that you might want to trade later? Are you picking players that fit the salary cap? You know, where do they go from here? Where else do they have to pick up players?
Well, I think back to your question, if you look at what Mo Johnston did in Toronto a year ago, totally different dynamic. None of those players ended up
Picked him to get rid of him.
Picked him to trade him. But Frankie Yallop, I think, knew exactly what he was doing. He traded Brian Carroll right away. That was a salary issue. Kamara, much less money. But I think he picked players that are going to be role players, except for Goodson and Cochran. The rest are good, solid role players at the right price.
Right. And Ivan Guerrero, maybe a player that could start on the left. James Riley, a couple other players that could start. So I think he did very well. San Jose off to a great start. We'll see how they can start to fill the stands as well, though, as soon as the season gets going. Now, in Los Angeles, there's a new player coming in, Clint Mathis. LA went down under this past week. They played in Australia against Sydney FC. They played in New Zealand. They went 1-1. Clint Mathis got a goal in Wellington in the 4-1 victory. More importantly, David Beckham got 2 goals, free kick and a PK.
Look, Greg, I think this is a great trip for the LA Galaxy. It's exactly what they needed. After a season of chaos, there's no better time for the guys to bond with a new coach, go far away, go on the road, play some big friendlies. They played in front of 80,000 people. Gives Beckham a chance to get acclimated with his teammates.
Right.
And you're right about Mathis. You know, I'm a believer in Clint Mathis. I think he'll do well there.
Well, I think we're all believers in Clint Mathis. Is we get so frustrated, though, sometimes when it just doesn't seem to pan out for him. Doesn't really fit. You know, he plays really well in one game, and then it doesn't go well for him. The other side of this LA trip, of course, was that they sold a ton of Beckham jerseys down there. 20,000 in Australia alone. Got to pay his salary somehow, right?
You know what? I'm going to start giving compliments to Landon Donovan, of all people, because I've been highly critical of him over the years. I think his attitude about the hoopla, about Beckham, has been great. I mean, I think he really wants this team to work. He made a comment about Clint Mathis, said he's the most technically gifted player in Major League Soccer. So I like the attitude of Landon Donovan.
Well, the Los Angeles offseason has gotten off to a great start. We'll see if they can push it all the way through and into next season. Last week, Brian Ching was made a very happy man with the announcement of the Pan Pacific Championship to take place in his home state, Hawaii, pitting 2 MLS teams, the Los Angeles Galaxy and the Houston Dynamo, against a team from Japan and a team from Australia. I think this is a great marketing tool for MLS. I think this is going to be a wonderful tournament. What are your thoughts?
Hey, Greg, I'll tell you what. Initially, I was disappointed or indifferent, really, but now I'm getting excited about it. I mean, I like the exposure. I like the branding. I like the opportunity for these MLS teams to get out and play against other international teams. Even if it's a friendly format, I think because it's an Australian team and a Japanese team, I think our teams are going to play hard.
Well, I agree, and especially when you look at how MLS has done in international tournaments, say in the CONCACAF Champions Cup and things like that, I think it's good for them to get out and play different teams from different countries, different styles, even if it's in a friendly environment.
Well, again, as long as they play hard, I like the games. I don't like friendly games where you just go out, you play your second team, you knock it around. I don't think that's going to be the case here. I think these guys are going to go, they're going to play to win.
And it's certainly a brand awareness thing, and sometime in the future, maybe they can even go further to the east and play in Japan or even China. And speaking of China, now, this Sunday, the U.S. Under-23 team, coached by Peter Novak, is going to head over to China for a little tour, a pre-Olympic tour, if you will. And Novak's got some good players on that squad.
Greg, I'm not objective about it because I played for the Olympic team. I went to the Olympics. I think it's a meaningful tournament. This one, though, is critical for the U.S. We have players, you and I were talking before, that are now seasoned players from Major League Soccer. So Peter Novak has really a talented roster.
He has a great roster. About 21 or 20 of the players on that 23-man roster are from MLS. Got some great young goalkeeper. Chris Seitz is on there. A couple of guys from Toronto. Maurice Edu has already gotten some caps to the full national team in there. Now, in 2004, the team didn't make the Olympics in Athens, and really, I thought that was a failure. This is a team that had several really good young players, some MLS veterans that should have done better. They went down to Mexico and they lost. Now, in qualifying in February in the United States, this is the time when they have to make it because these pros now, they've been in MLS for several years, they really have to qualify for Beijing.
Yeah, Greg, I totally agree with you. I think Peter Novak is the right guy to get the best out of the team. Remember the trip to China, he's missing some of the star players that are in Europe. Danny Zatella, Freddie Adu, Michael Bradley. He also, Peter Novak, he's going to have the option of using 3 overage players. So maybe he takes a Tim Howard, a Bocanegra, Eddie Johnson.
Yeah, some of those players right up the spine, especially need a center back if you're going to go for those overage players. And, this might be the first time in history, I think, maybe since you were playing in the Olympics, that the U.S. can actually sit there and say, do we have a chance to really get a medal? Time to wind up the ET rumor mill, Shep, and we're going to start off with DC United. They're chasing after Juan Sebastion Veron, the 32-year-old Argentine midfielder playing right now at Estudiantes down in Argentina. What do you think about this?
Well, first, I think he's an old 32, Greg.
He is an old 32.
I'll tell you what, I don't like it because to me, when you talk about a designated player in Major League Soccer, they're all going to have great skill on the ball, but they need great character, like Beckham, like Blanco, like Juan Pablo Angel. I think Veron, I think he's more like a Danielson.
Well, to me, it's not only just the character, it's also, you got to bring a little bit something special. I mean, I want a guy who's going to create something, whether it's create magic in the stands like Beckham has or create magic on the field like Blanco has. That, to me, is what a DP has to be. Now, let's go up I-95 a little bit, up to New York, where JOZY Altidore, the young phenom for the Red Bulls, rumors that he might be going to Real Madrid of all teams come the January transfer window.
Greg, there's no question. I think one day JOZY Altidore goes to Europe to a big club like Real Madrid, but he's a kid that's got a head on his shoulders. He knows to go there now, sit on the reserve team, doesn't benefit his career. And I think Red Bull, they've shown they're in this thing for the long haul. They're not going to let him go.
Well, Red Bull, that's for sure. They're building the stadium. They're trying to spend some money for a coach. But JOZY Altidore, when he goes, to me, he's a $10 million player. If he were an Argentine or a Brazilian, he'd be $10, $15 million right now. Because he's the U.S., there's sort of the discount. Now, we were just speaking of the coach for New York. What's going on with the coaching staff there?
I think they're doing the right thing, New York, in terms of they're not going after the big name, high profile, Mourinho, Capello. They're not doing that. They're focused on what has worked in Major League Soccer. Do they want Juan Carlos Osorio? Absolutely.
Going to have to pay for that one, though.
Well, they have money.
Right.
But that's the type of coach they're looking at. They've spoken to Preki. Peter Novak's name has come up. Paul Mariner. So they got to get it right, Greg, this time. They can't screw it up.
Right. Well, you go after a coach that knows the league, because right now New York really needs to rebuild from the back going forward. They get to bring a coach in like Osorio, knows the players, knows the league. Osorio also has connections to New York, but if they're going to get Juan Carlos away from Chicago, they're going to have to give up a little bit of money, obviously some players and some picks. Still, if they offer the right price, I think Chicago will go for it. This week we got an email from Carlos in Arizona who was wondering why there's no talk about expansion to Phoenix. We have had several conversations about expansion teams. We were talking about San Jose earlier today, and obviously Seattle coming in 2009. What about Phoenix?
Well, I'll tell you what, Carlos, thanks for the email, but I think it's wishful thinking. Phoenix really doesn't, to my knowledge, have ownership and or a stadium in sight. So the much more likely candidates, Philadelphia, St. Louis.
Yeah, well, Phoenix does have a company that's a little bit interested, but they're just not far enough along, Carlos. Maybe sometime in the future, though, a team can make it down to Phoenix. Now, if anybody else has questions, comments, opinions, or wants to wind up the rumor mill themselves, email us at extratime@mlsnet.com. Unfortunately, that's all we have for ET this week, but join us again next week. Shep will be here and I'll be here, and we'll kick it around.